I didn't raise my voice when he fired me. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask why. I just slid my badge across the table and then, calmly, slid him my card. He laughed. Actually laughed. Leaned back in his chair, glanced at the card like it was a joke menu and said, "You think you're irreplaceable? This company doesn't need consultants." 30 days later, the merger nearly collapsed because of that laugh. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first time the general counsel used my full name on a conference call, I knew someone was bleeding internally. Not metaphorically, contractually. The call was already tense when I joined. No greetings, no pleasantries, just breathing, keyboard clicks, and the low hum of a boardroom speaker system that costs more than my first car. Blake Harrington was talking. Confident, smooth. The way men sound when they think the problem is technical and solvable with authority. Then legal interrupted him with a single sentence. "Before we proceed, why did we terminate the named continuity authority listed in Vendor Continuity Clause 14.3b? Silence. I muted myself and waited, because for the first time in 11 years, the company wasn't ignoring me anymore. For 11 years, my title was Senior Vendor Integration Manager, which is corporate speak for the person everyone pretends doesn't exist until something breaks. I didn't manage people. I managed transitions. When we acquired a regional logistics firm in Ohio with a homegrown ERP system held together by macros and prayer, that was me. When we absorbed a European distributor whose warehouse scanner spoke a different data dialect than ours, me again. When two vendors hated each other so much they refused to be on the same call, still me. Internally, people called me the guy who fixes broken mergers quietly. No awards, no applause, just silence when things worked. And I liked it that way. I had a routine. Same desk, third floor, north side windows. Same black notebook with handwritten flowcharts. Same coffee mug with a crack in the handle that HR once suggested I replace because it looked unprofessional. I knew the company's vendor ecosystem better than anyone alive, including the vendors themselves, because I'd been there when the contracts were signed. Blake arrived like a press release. Tall, perfect teeth, MBA-heavy vocabulary. Promoted to Director of Corporate Operations 6 months after transferring from a consulting firm that specialized in organizational velocity. He shook hands hard, smiled wide, and talked about fresh energy like experience was mold. The first email he ever sent me ended with, "We're going to move fast. Legacy thinking can't slow us down." Legacy thinking. That was his phrase. What he meant was people who remember how things actually work. Blake announced the Operational Streamlining Initiative in an all-hands email sent at 6:42 a.m. on a Monday. That was deliberate. People read emails differently before coffee. The initiative required longtime managers to re-document all workflows, upload vendor contact trees into a centralized shared drive, and ensure redundancy of institutional knowledge. Redundancy. That word landed wrong in my chest. I spent 3 weeks documenting systems I had built across a decade. Not generic descriptions, not summaries, detailed maps, vendor escalation ladders, integration dependencies, handshake assumptions between platforms that were never written into contracts. I uploaded them because policy required compliance, but I noticed something strange 2 weeks later. In a leadership deck circulated before a quarterly review, my integration framework appeared, rebranded. Same structure, same phrasing, same weird metaphor I used about duct tape holding a satellite together. Only the author line said Blake Harrington. Then my system permissions changed. Nothing dramatic, just missing buttons. Approval access downgraded from Tier 3 to Tier 2. I emailed IT. They CC'd HR. HR replied with a sentence that still makes my jaw tighten. "This is temporary restructuring friction. Please remain flexible." Flexible. That's corporate for don't make noise. So I didn't. I opened my notebook and started documenting something else. The quarterly ops meeting was scheduled for 90 minutes. Blake cut it to 45. Efficiency theater. I was halfway through a presentation on vendor overlap risks when he interrupted me, not angrily, casually. He leaned forward and said, "This is outdated thinking. We are moving faster now." Outdated. I watched 6 executives nod without understanding a word of what either of us had said. 2 weeks later, Blake announced a successful vendor renegotiation. He used my language, my cadence, my risk framing, even the same damn slide order I used internally. Junior managers stopped inviting me to meetings. Calendar invites dried up like a plant someone forgot existed. Still, I didn't react. I saved emails, logged timestamps, downloaded access logs, and I updated my annual ethics disclosure to confirm my consulting LLC was still registered and dormant, because I'd learned something important about Blake. He didn't think in systems, he thought in optics. The meeting invite came at 3:17 p.m. Subject line, quick sync. No agenda. No HR listed. I knew. Blake's office smelled like citrus cleaner and confidence. He didn't ask me to sit. He said my role was redundant, that operations needed agility, that the company was evolving. Security was already outside. As I handed over my badge, I placed my business card on his desk. Black, minimal. My name. My LLC. He laughed, actually laughed, and said the line he'd regret forever. "You think you're irreplaceable? This company doesn't need consultants." What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that in 30 days, the company would legally need me specifically because 8 years earlier, I'd written my name into the contracts no one ever reread. And as I walked out of that building, cardboard box in my arms, phone already buzzing with vendor confusion, I didn't feel angry. I felt precise, because I knew exactly what clock had just started ticking, and exactly how much silence it would take before panic filled the room. I got home, set the box down, opened my laptop, logged into the public registry, and began updating my LLC availability. Slowly, carefully, because revenge isn't loud, it's patient, and it starts with doing exactly what the rules say. I drafted the first notification email to our Tier 1 vendors, fingers hovering over the keyboard as I reread the policy language one more time, making sure every word was compliant, professional, and completely devastating before typing. Effective immediately, I am no longer authorized to act internally on behalf of company name. Regarding post-merger system integration, vendor escalation, or continuity approvals. I listed my termination date. I referenced the clause by number, not interpretation. I included no opinions. At the bottom, I added one sentence. For compliance reasons, please direct all future integration-related requests through approved internal channels or an authorized external consultant. No signature flourish, no bitterness. Just fact. That's how you light a fuse without anyone smelling smoke. By Monday morning, my phone was vibrating like it had a pulse of its own. Voicemails stocked up from numbers I recognized immediately. A German logistics provider whose warehouse scanners refused to handshake with our North American ERP unless a very specific middleware flag was toggled. A West Coast distributor who'd been acquired 3 years earlier and still technically operated under legacy escalation terms. An internal analyst, someone I'd mentored, texted, "Hey, quick question. Did you actually leave? Blake says everything's covered, but vendors are weird." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care. Because the policy was explicit. No internal consultation post-termination. Violations voided severance and opened personal liability. Blake loved rules when they protected him. I loved them when they boxed him in. On day 4, the first vendor did exactly what the contract allowed. They paused. Not loudly, not dramatically. They sent a formal notice citing uncertainty regarding continuity authority during active system migration. That phrase, continuity authority, was my language, buried in contracts written during acquisitions no one remembered clearly. Contracts Blake had skimmed, if at all. By day 7, another vendor followed, then another. Integration slowed. Data syncs failed silently. Reports started misaligning. Nothing catastrophic, yet. Just enough friction to make dashboards unreliable, and unreliable dashboards are how executives lose sleep. I found out later, much later, that Blake's first response wasn't to call legal. It was to schedule meetings. He assigned a junior manager to own integration continuity. A smart kid, hardworking, terrified. They lasted 2 calls, because every vendor asked the same question. Are you the named authority under clause 14.3b? And every time, the answer was no. The vendors weren't being difficult. They were being protected. Contracts don't care about confidence. They care about names. The email from legal arrived on day 10 from a senior counsel I'd worked with before. Subject line: question regarding vendor continuity provisions. Carefully worded, non-accusatory. I read it twice before responding. My reply was 3 sentences long. Professional, polite, non-committal. I confirmed my termination date. I confirmed my previous role. I confirmed that I could not advise internally. Then I added, if the company requires external consulting support, my LLC availability is public. That was it. I didn't attach a rate. Didn't suggest urgency. Let them discover that part themselves. What Blake still didn't know, what legal was only beginning to realize, was that the merger wasn't just upcoming. It was contractually time-bound. The international partner had penalty clauses tied to integration milestones. Miss 1, fees. Miss 2, renegotiation leverage. Miss 3, walkaway rights. And all 3 milestones required, explicitly, approval from the named continuity authority, which was still me. The emergency call was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon. No subject line, just a calendar block titled Urgent. When I joined, there were more people on the line that I'd heard together in years. CFO, COO, legal, Blake. Blake sounded confident at first. He talked about temporary vendor hesitation, about alignment issues. Then legal asked the question, the one I'd replayed in my head for days. Why did we terminate the named continuity authority listed in Vendor Continuity Clause 14.3b? Silence. Not awkward silence, structural silence. The kind where everyone realizes the answer isn't coming. I stayed muted, listened, waited. Because revenge isn't the moment you speak, it's the moment you don't need to. Eventually, legal addressed me directly, used my full name, asked if I'd consider supporting the merger externally. I said yes. Then I stated my terms. $500 an hour. Minimum 20 hours per week. No internal decision-making authority beyond contract scope. All communication documented. No exceptions, no discounts, no loyalty pricing. The line went quiet again. Then someone, higher up than Blake, said, "Proceed." I heard it in his voice then, the shift. The moment confidence collapses into calculation. He tried to frame it as a temporary partnership. I didn't respond. Legal did. They reminded him he was no longer overseeing the merger. That oversight had been reassigned. That decision would be reviewed. I stayed muted, took notes, because I'd learned something important over 11 years. The most devastating thing you can do to someone like Blake is to let the system speak for you. I completed the merger in 90 days, quietly, methodically. Vendors resumed, systems synced, dashboards stabilized. I billed every hour, and when HR eventually asked if I'd consider returning full-time,
I slid my card across the table again. This time, no one laughed. I didn't step foot back into the building the first week. That wasn't spite. That was leverage. My consulting agreement was explicit. Remote first and less physical presence was contractually required, and it wasn't. Every system I touched lived in servers, permissions, and documents I already knew better than my own kitchen. Still, word traveled fast. People noticed when integrations that had been unsolvable for weeks suddenly stabilized the moment my invoices started going out. They noticed because Blake noticed. The first thing Blake lost wasn't his job. It was his authority. In corporate environments, that's worse. He was still on calls, but muted more often than not. Still copied on emails, but rarely addressed directly. Still introduced, but without the warmth that used to follow his name. I saw it in the meeting recordings, the subtle pauses when someone corrected him, the way legal stopped softening their language, the way executives asked for confirmation from me even when he was speaking. He tried to regain ground. He forwarded my emails with annotations, like commentary would reinsert him into relevance. It didn't. Because once a system identifies a liability, it stops listening to excuses. I wasn't told when it started. I didn't need to be. Blake's metadata trail was loud if you knew where to look. File access logs, timestamp overlaps, download histories tied to leadership decks he'd presented as his own. Legal didn't accuse. They asked. They asked why his device accessed integration files at 11:47 p.m. the night before a presentation. They asked why phrases unique to my internal notes appeared verbatim in executive summaries attributed to him. They asked why the company's risk exposure spiked immediately after my termination. Blake answered like someone used to bluffing through meetings. The system answered with documents. This time, Blake joined late. That never used to happen. I was already there, reviewing a checklist aloud, vendor by vendor, confirming restored compliance. Legal interrupted me gently. Before we close, there's an administrative update. Blake stopped breathing for a second. You could hear it. His oversight role was officially reassigned, effective immediately, pending review. He said nothing, didn't argue, didn't ask questions. Because when reviews start at that level, questions sound like admissions. Blake wasn't fired that day. He was moved. Special projects. No direct reports, no budget authority. A title that sounded important and meant nothing. 3 weeks later, he was gone. No announcement, no farewell email. His LinkedIn updated quietly a month after that, describing his departure as a mutual decision. It never is. The final time I saw him was accidental. I was on site for a required sign-off, my only physical visit during the contract. He was packing a box, the same cheap cardboard kind I'd carried out months earlier. He looked older, not ruined, just corrected. He didn't say anything. Neither did I, because the moment had already passed. I finished the merger ahead of the revised schedule. The international partner extended the contract. My LLC took on 3 more clients within 6 months. Word travels when you save companies quietly. HR reached out again. Different tone this time. Different respect. They asked if I'd consider returning. Full-time. Director level. I declined, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Because once you see how fragile authority really is, how dependent it is on people who know where the bodies are buried, you stop needing titles to feel secure. I didn't win by yelling. I didn't win by exposing secrets or burning bridges. I won by knowing the rules better than the man who thought rules were beneath him. Revenge doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like patience and an invoice. So I'll leave you with this. Have you ever had a boss who laughed at you because they thought you didn't matter? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where arrogance collides with paperwork, make sure you subscribe, because the system always remembers who built it.